Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today is the day I'm going to be talking about Iron Flame by Rebecca Yaros. Now there's been a lot of controversy surrounding this author, not only because she is an absolutely horrifically bad writer. Honestly, worst writer I've ever read, maybe aside from Jennifer L. Armentrout. Like, the fact that they're even in the same sentence, though, is enough to be able to show to you how bad this writer is, in my opinion. There has been a lot of noise surrounding Rebecca Yaros recently because of what has been happening in Palestine and Israel. She submitted a post, and please go and educate yourselves on this topic if you so wish to. If you want to find out more, please go and do that and spend the time to do that. But she essentially submitted a post on Instagram where she did not endorse a ceasefire in Gaza. And look, I never want this channel to be political because politics is such a personal thing, in my opinion, and I think everything is so heavily politicized these days. But the fact that an author who wrote a book about the military and about war can't even publicly say that thousands of innocent people, especially children, are being murdered by the Israeli government is just shocking. Like, it's shockingly bad form. I think the thing that really gets me is that she's literally written a book about war. I would expect somebody who has tried to write about it in some sensitive way, whether she's done a good job of it is another question, but she's tried to talk about how war can be very damaging in her books, in her first one and in the second one, and yet she can't just put her very pro-military stance to the side, despite the fact that thousands of children, just focus on the children alone for argument's sake, are being murdered. Like, you've got to be a real special level of sick, in my opinion, to endorse that behaviour. And I think a lot of people are going to think, well, she didn't say anything, so how is she endorsing? By not saying anything, you are endorsing. Now, I don't say anything on my booktube channel because it's my booktube channel. I talk about books. In my personal life, though, this is something that I talk about, and I implore everybody to have at least a baseline understanding of what is happening in Palestine right now, because it's really not good. And I'm not going to go into it any more further than this, but the point is that I know that there are a lot of people saying that we shouldn't be giving attention to her as an author, and I do agree with that, but I hated this book, and I never liked this author in the first place, but with now this being factored in, I dislike her actively now. I'm not endorsing this book. I think this book is horrifically bad, just like the first book was, and I implore you to stay away from it. Not just because this author's writing is terrible, though that is reason enough, but also because she's just a bad person as well. So, zero endorsement here. I am doing this video to really showcase that not only is this person just bad because of her stance on this specific topic, but also just because she is a terrible writer. Like, she's a very, very, very terrible writer. All right. That was really long-winded. So I don't really know how I'm going to do this rant review. I have my iPad, which I'm going to grab here. You can see it here. Now, I actually was gifted the paperback of this book, but I found it really hard to read for some reasons. So somebody that I know actually gave me a copy of their Kindle version. They were able to do that for me, so I didn't have to pay any money for it, neither did my friend. And I actually gave my friend the physical copy back, and she has now returned it back to whichever bookstore she bought it from, because I want her to have her money back, and I also don't want money to be going to the author. So I'm just going to find the book on my iPad. What is it called? Iron Flame. I tabbed a lot. I don't know if we're going to be able to get through every single thing, and I don't even know if we should do that. I have no particular order to go in, by the way. Like, this is just going to be me picking up on things as I go through my notes in the book. This book picks up pretty much, I don't know, like a few days after the events of the end of book one. At the end of book one, we learn that Brennan is alive, that Zayden has been working with him, which I predicted very early on, and there is conflict between Zayden and Violet because Xaden didn't tell her about the revolution and about Brennan, obviously, and now she doesn't trust him. I made a point of saying that he was completely valid in doing what he did, given that she was close to Dane or had a relationship with Dane, and Dane could read minds, and so it makes sense for him not to tell her in case he touches her face or touches her. And I'm just trying to think, like, what were the other big kind of highlights? I think those were the main things that kind of happened at the end of book one. Some of my big issues with the writing in that book were the very infantile dialogue. I just don't really like the way the author writes. It's just like she's clearly trying to write in like a medieval time period, and yet the characters speak like people do in the 21st century, and it's just very jarring. There's also a lot of swearing in this book, and it's swearing for swearing's sake. I don't mind swearing in books. Like, a lot of my favourite authors do it, and I really don't care. I just find it funny when it's done in a way where you can clearly tell the author is doing it to make the characters feel edgy. And that's exactly what she did in this book. And it's just laughably bad, because you're just continuously hearing the F word or shit or whatever it is, right? It's just bad. It's just really, really bad. And this book is the second out of 5 books. So we have another 3 books to go, apparently. Don't know if I'm going to read them. If I can get the books for free, then maybe I will read them or review them and continue to do this kind of video series explaining why you shouldn't read the series. But I think this book could have been split into 2 books, because we have part 1 and part 2, and they are very different. There is a very big tonal shift between part 1 and part 2, and it never really gets explained as to why that tonal shift happens. It just happens. And part of me feels like the publisher just combined books 2 and 3 together, and that's why we have this gigantic book that my Kindle version was 800 pages, which is just absurd. All right, I'm just, like I said, I don't have any particular order of how I'm going to do this review. I just have like all my comments and tabs, and we probably won't even get through most of them. And I'll just try and pick some stuff to kind of focus on. Obviously, this is going to be full of spoilers. If you haven't read it and you want to, and you don't want to be spoiled for it, obviously turn off this video. And without further ado, let's jump in. So on page 1, one of the first things we get from our very smart, intelligent character, and this is something that I picked up in the first book, where the author continuously writes full stops after each word to really focus on that sentence or focus on what the character is saying. So like, as an example, you know, if somebody was annoying me, I could say, leave me alone. You'd put full stops after each word to really kind of focus on it, right? And kind of show that I'm annoyed. I think there are about 40 instances of that in the first book. And one of my biggest issues with using that form of, I don't know, dialogue or inner monologue or whatever you want to call it, is that it makes your characters seem really juvenile. It makes your characters seem really dumb. And not only does Rebecca keep using it, she just doubles down on it. And I think there's over 80 uses of that in this book, which is insane to me. Like, that's actually insane when you really think about it. And on our very, very first page, we have Brennan is alive. And it's like, come on, mate. Like, really? We're really going to start like that? Come on. Come on. So that's like literally like the first page of the book. Now, we get a little bit of context as to what's been happening. The riders, the group of folks that were in Athelbine or whatever it's called, where Liam died in the previous book, and where the Venom came, that group of riders, they're now with Brennan in this other part of this world that I can't remember the name of, nor do I particularly care of. All we know is that Xaden's family used to rule there. They used to live in that house that they're based in. It's not a house, it's like a palace or something. But the point is that they've been there for a few days and they need to get back to Basgiath, because otherwise the folks on the other side are going to think that they're hiding something, or even worse, that they're dead. So they have to basically go back to Basgiath. And now one of the kind of things in this book that I think Rebecca really tries to develop is her politics. And my gosh, this woman can't do anything right. Like, it's just so bad. It's just so bad. And I'll come on to that a little bit more later on. But there's this one scene where they're in the court, and this is still, I think, in the first chapter, and Xaden gets reintroduced, right? Because her and Xaden, you know, they're not on good terms at this point in time. And Xaden comes back in, and all she focuses on is his physical attributes. And this is what she says. He's physically fucking perfect to me, and that's just his face. His body, somehow even better, and the way he uses it when he has me in his arms. Nope. I shake my head and cut off my thoughts right there. Xaden may be gorgeous and powerful and terrifyingly lethal, which shouldn't be the turn on that it is, but I can't trust him to tell me the truth about, well, anything. This kind of whole paragraph really sums up to me two of my biggest issues with this series. One is the continuous focus on physical attributes. There's nothing wrong with that inherently. It's just that when you're trying to position these two characters as being endgame and all you talk about is their physical attributes, I just find it really hard to believe, to be completely honest. And then the second thing that keeps coming up multiple times throughout this entire book is the fact that Violet can't trust Xaden just because he didn't tell her about Brennan and because of the fact that they were working with other, like, revolutionaries. And again, I go back to what I said earlier, which is that if Dane touched her, he would know everything. And so naturally, you would think, even though you would be hurt by it, you would still understand that it's okay because I am a vulnerable person, because my mind is vulnerable to anybody who can read minds or who can, you know, get a good sense of someone's emotions or anything like that. But no, she doesn't have it in her to put that to one side, to put her ego to the side for the greater good and to forgive Xaden as a result of that. And this comes up, I kid you not, in like every single chapter up until the end of the book. Like, it's so repetitive, it's so boring, it's so juvenile. There was even one point where I actually felt for Xaden, which is saying something because this guy is like a wet blanket. There's one point where I actually felt for him, and there's one bit in the book later on where he tells her, like, I need you to communicate with me better. And I was like, yes, Xaden has boundaries and, like, he wants communication. And yet here you have this imbecile who is just constantly going in this spiral of, oh, he didn't trust me. Well, he had completely valid reasons not to trust her. It's just unbearable. It is just unbearable. One of the other things that I mentioned in book one is this continuous focus on Violet's hair. Violet has silver tipped hair, and it's made a big deal out of in book one, and it's made an even bigger deal out of in book two. And now I have a theory as to why this is a big deal. In that court meeting that I mentioned, one of the court members, I've forgotten her name, she's like a counselor or something, she continuously stares at her silver hair. This comes onto one of my theories, and I think Violet is part Venom. And why do I think Violet is part Venom? Now, there's a bunch of stuff that happens way later on in the book that will somehow justify what I'm saying, but just go with the flow. If you've read it, you'll kind of get where I'm going with this. At the beginning of each chapter, there are these like little kind of, I don't know what you call them, like just like passages from like historical texts. And one of the passages is a letter between Violet's mother and one of the like really like famous scribes, like Violet's old teacher. And in that letter, they talk about how they basically allude to the fact that someone that they both know can't be turned back from being Venom, which implies that they were trying to find a solution to undo that person being Venom. And I think that person that they're referring to is Violet's father. Now, Violet's father, we get very little mention of him, but we do get a lot of insight into the fact that he was trying to do a lot of research on Venom. And I think that's why. I think it's because he was Venom. And there seems to be a long tailwind between when someone becomes Venom at the start. There seems to be like a tiering of like how bad it gets, basically. It doesn't just happen that you become really bad straight away. Like, there's like, you kind of still remain and keep your faculties, and then you slowly deteriorate over time. And I think that's probably what happened to her father. He got turned into a Venom. He maybe pulled too much power from the ground. They conceived Violet, and that's why Violet it has the silver tipped hair, and why I think she has like some sort of an affinity to the Venom as well. Like, the main Venom bad guy is called the Sage, and the Sage has a bit of a connection to Violet. He also has a connection to Xaden, which is interesting. And I think the Sage could either be Violet's father Or maybe he's like big boss and the sage is maybe somebody else. And I have a theory on that, who that could be. I think the sage could potentially be Brennan's ex-lover. I think his name was Nowlin or something. Nowlin. I think he's somehow involved in all of this as well. So anyway, I don't know how I managed to jump into that theory so quickly. But the point is that there is something bigger happening here with the Venin. And one of my theories is that her dad is a Venin, and I don't think he's dead. Or like dead. Because I think if you are Venin, you are like part dead anyway. And I think Brennan's ex-lover is also Venin, because one of the quotes that he says is that Nowlin gave a lot of himself, like to the point where it like destroyed him. And he didn't say he was dead though, so I have a feeling we're gonna get him back at some point in the future books. So this consistent focus on the silver hair, I think, has a point. It's just again, it's just so obvious, you know. I think she needs to really work on her subtlety and like focus on just a few bits here and there. One of the other things I find really funny is the fact that Violet is very kind of aware of the fact of like how special and unique she is. One of the things that she says is, black dragons are rare but not unheard of, and I happen to bond two of them. I counter, outright glaring at him. Well, obviously, Violet, it's because you're so special and you're so unique, and like you have everything, you know, that's like obviously the biggest, baddest ever. One other thing that comes up quite a lot is the dragons. Obviously, the dragons are a big part of this book. And the dragons are smart. I think they're positioned to us as being very smart. They have their own law system. They have their own society. They have their own kind of way of doing things. And I do like that. It's just so badly executed in this book. One thing that she says near the start is, there are dragons here and they saved us, hid us in the network of caves within the valley. So this is when they go back to Basgiath and tell them what happens, why they were late back. And so the dragons are smart. Like, the question I kept getting in this book particularly is, why are the dragons not ruling these people? Why are the dragons so intent on forging a bond with humans when the humans are so fucking stupid? Like, I just don't get it. I don't understand what value the humans are bringing apart from trouble. Like, all they do is bring problems and trouble. So I don't understand why the dragons are not the ruling class in this book or in this series. Another thing that comes up where Brennan is involved is, I think Violet is very forgiving of Brennan, you know, of him doing what he had to do. Like, I get it. But at the same time, you know, she goes back into normal behavior with him very quickly. Like, I have two brothers. If one of my brothers did that to me, I would be absolutely furious. Mira has a much better reaction later on. She starts hitting him and she's swearing at him. I'd probably do the same, because I think I would just be so angry that that my brother lied to me. She's just like, okay. She's like, gets over it so quickly and like doesn't like, I don't know, like doesn't talk to him about it. She's so fixated on Xaden the entirety of this book that she barely thinks about her dead brother coming back to life. And I just find that so bizarre. She's more annoyed with Xaden about hiding it than her own brother hiding it. And that is just so weird to me. One of the things that she says is she's amazed by the things that she remembers about him. And it's like, well, that's your brother. Obviously, you're going to remember those things. But, like, because she's so horny all the time, like, maybe she doesn't. Like, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. One aspect of this book that is missing quite a big part of the book is Andana. So Andana is the baby dragon that Violet gets in the first book. We don't really know anything about Andana because she's a baby dragon, so she hasn't really grown into her powers yet. One of the things that is referenced at the start of the book is that Andana has like doubled in size within the space of a few days, so she's growing and she's developing. Andana is a even though she's not necessarily in the book that much, she's a part of the story quite a bit. And there is this mystery surrounding Andana about what type of dragon she is and what her like special skill is, because she changes colour every couple of chapters. 1 minute she looks purple, 1 minute she's described as being in like the forest and her dragon scales like change colour to mimic the colour of the grass and the trees. So she's basically like a chameleon, and I think that's probably going to be one of her like skills, is the fact that she can basically change her scales to blend into whatever environment she is. Also brings me on to a theory that could potentially be one of Violet's second powers. There is a lot of exploration around second powers in this book as well. most riders can't have second powers. The only types of people who can have second powers are people who have multiple dragons, which obviously is only Violet. And then the other one is people who get the dragon of an ancestor. So Xaden is a perfect example of this, obviously. He has a second power because he mated, you know what I mean? He got a bond with Sigale, who was his grandfather's dragon. And because he's a direct descendant of his grandfather, obviously he, for some reason or another, has the ability to get a second power. I don't really get why, like, the rules surrounding the dragons and powers just is really not very clear, and it's not very well thought out, in my opinion. I just found it really funny that obviously our two main characters are the ones that have second powers, obviously. And with Undana, we're still kind of figuring out what's going on there. But then the fact that that highlights that our lovely Xaden has a second power, which happens to be he is an intrinsic, I thought that was quite interesting, but also quite predictable. Because towards the start and middle of this book, one of the things that is constantly referenced is like these, like the feeling of like the trickle in one's brain or one's head. And this is referenced quite a lot in other fantasy books or sci-fi books, where someone is trying to do like mind control or trying to read your thoughts, where you can feel like somebody is invading your space. And that comes up so much in the first half of this book that by the time you find out that he is actually intrinsic, it kind of loses some of the surprise. And I actually think that would have been a really cool surprise, and I actually quite liked the idea of him being an intrinsic. Now, being an intrinsic in this world is very dangerous. It's the most dangerous power to have, and if the government find out that you are an intrinsic, they will kill you. They will murder that person straight up, just because it's incredibly invasive. Xaden had to hide that pretty much his entire life, and nobody knows about it, which I quite like that idea. It's just the execution was really terrible. And because Rebecca Yaros just cannot do nuance, by the time that we find out, it's just so obvious that that's what's going to happen. The thing I find really frustrating about this book and about this series is that there are certain ideas that are really great. It's just the execution is just shockingly bad. And I would, like I said before, I would really love someone to actually do justice to this book. Yeah. Or to these tropes, I should say. And all right, let's move on. So I've already started off with some pretty heavy hitting points, but let's continue on. So as it relates to Xaden and Violet, I mentioned about how, like, one of the constant things of this book is how she doesn't trust him. One of the things that she does throughout this book is talk about things that he's done for her, and she talks about it in a very loving way. Like, as an example, she says, "No, this is Xaden, the wing leader who slaughtered every attacker in my bedroom without breaking a sweat or losing a minute of sleep over it afterward." Like, what is the point of you bringing this up? She thinks that he doesn't care about her. So by her own definition, he would have only done that out of self-preservation, because if she died, it would put Ten at risk, which would put Sigale at risk, which would put him at risk. And so she's contradicting herself many times in this book, because one minute she's like, he doesn't love me, he doesn't like me, he doesn't respect me. And then the next minute she's like, oh, he does. And it's like, mate, make your mind up. Make your mind up. One thing that I didn't mention in my previous rant review was the fact that our main character has a disability. I don't know the name of the disability, I'm very sorry, but she basically has a disability that means that if she gets hit or hurt, it takes significantly longer for her to heal than it would the average person. And yet, we never really hear about that. We never really hear about the consequences that everything she does has on her body. There are multiple times in this book specifically where she is in very intense action scenes. There's even one bit where she's being straight up tortured by this really horrible guy, Varish. And yet she's fine a few days after, just like she's, you know, like anybody else. Like, I don't understand why the author made a point to say that this character is disabled, but then continue to treat her like she's just like anybody else, because she's not. Does that mean that she can't do what other people can do? No, it just means that she has to adapt differently to a situation compared to the average person. And yet she just pushes through, she does what she wants to do just like any other person does. And yet she doesn't actually suffer any consequences to her body for doing that. So it's literally moot. I personally think the author used this physical disability as a way to show that she has disability rap in her series, because it literally doesn't matter. It doesn't add anything to the story. We don't get any reflections from the main character about this. And it's just there to be able to say there's disability rap in this series. And I just think that's disgusting. I think that's really gross. Like, I think the message that this author is giving, if you push through it, if you just keep pushing through it and you block it out of your mind, you'll be fine, is so toxic. It's like toxic positivity. And I fucking hate it. And it's just really bad form. And I find it really ironic considering the writer herself, I believe, has this disability that she's referencing in our main character. And yet her mentality is push through it, because you can do it. You can do it. And it's like, no, some people have limits and that's okay. Why don't you show us a narrative where this character has to adapt to that? No, that would be too hard, wouldn't it? Next, okay, so as it relates to dragons, as I said, this is going to be really disordered. So, you know, I totally understand if this is difficult to watch just because I'm not going any particular order. But I was talking about the dragons earlier and about how the dragons are really smart, right? And one of the things that Xaden says, this is probably about 10% into the book now, is that dragons give their own orders. Now, what I don't understand is what is the point of the relationship between the dragons and the humans? What do the dragons, again, get from the humans? Like, I just don't understand. Why do they need riders? They are sentient. They can think for themselves. They can communicate. They're very smart. There's smaller dragons. There's bigger dragons. There's dragons with loads of different powers. Like, why do they need humans? They have their own rule of law. They have their own kind of sense of hierarchy. I just don't understand. I just don't understand. One of the inconsistencies of this series so far is the way in which the society is set up. Now, in chapter 6, one of the, I think it's called an epitaph, like one of the things at the top of the page before the chapter actually begins says this. What no one openly says is that while all 4 quadrants obey the code of conduct, a rider's first responsibility is to the codex, which often overrules the regulations other quadrants live by. By definition, the riders make their own rules. Like, why? You're in a military school, so what, the riders can just do whatever they want? Like, what is the point of being in a system that's supposed to be training people if you can just do whatever the fuck you want? Like, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I just don't understand why you would create a system that essentially allows dragons to go fuck off and do their own thing, allow riders to go fuck off and do their own thing, and let go have the government to fuck off and do their own thing. Like, the society is set up in a way where it's optimized to be unharmonious. It's set up in a way so that chaos can ensue and thrive. And that just doesn't make sense to me. It just literally makes no sense. One big issue that I have with this series as well is just Yaros's writing. Obviously, it's a big issue for me. I've referenced some examples at the start of this video. One of the things that I just find she does really often is she like contradicts herself. Like, she'll say something and then contradict herself later on. And she literally does this in this paragraph. I still don't know exactly what that means, nor is Ten open to questions on the parenting secrets of dragons, but he insists that sleeping away the next few months is critical to her growth and development. Part of me can't help wondering if it's simply a clever way to avoid a majority of the teenage years of moody dragons. 2 months is not multiple years. It literally says sleeping away the next 2 months. And then she says this is a clever way to avoid a majority of the teenage years. Guys, like, contradict yourself in the same paragraph. Violet's character development in this book is pretty much non-existent. She talks about how she doesn't want to be a leader and how she just, you know, wants to go to school and do what she needs to do. And yet Yaros is obviously setting her up to be the biggest, baddest leader in the world. And I have a very strong feeling, this is another prediction, Violet will become a queen or a ruler at some point in this book. Now, Xaden is heir to the throne of his grandfather's throne of that place that I've forgotten the name of, nor do I particularly care about. So either she will marry Xaden and she will become queen, or whatever is the equivalent to that place. We get introduced to another character in this book called Eric. I hate it when authors try to reinvent new names just by spelling it differently. It just looks stupid. Eric, because that's basically what it is, He is the son of the current ruling king of, I don't know what the name of the city is, of Navarre. There's definitely sparks between these two. I have a feeling that given what we know by the end of this book, which is that Xaden has become Venin, Xaden will fuck off in the next book and he will break up with Violet first, and then he'll try to find a cure for whatever Venin affliction that he has. And then I think Violet and Eric will have a little schmoozy fest for a book. And then Xaden will come back because he's found a solution to the Venin problem. And that will be with her dad, I think, or some other person. But my point is that I think we've literally got introduced to this character just because he is a love interest for Violet, but I also think he also is a potential path for Violet becoming one of the most powerful rulers in this universe, and I think she could become queen potentially. My other theory as it relates to Eric about who he could marry and who he could take as queen is Kat. Now, Kat is Xaden's ex-girlfriend, and she is the worst character. And not necessarily because she's poorly written like all of these other characters are, and she is poorly written, don't get me wrong. The reason why I hate her though is because I thought we had gotten over the women hate women trope, you know? I thought we'd gotten over the jealous ex trying to like damage the current girlfriend trope. I hate it. I hate it. We're not 10 years old. We're not stuck in the 80s. Like what? Like why? The whole like women hating women as a like reason for character development or plot development just grosses me out, and I just think it's pathetic. I actually think it's really pathetic of this author to make that a really big focus of this book, because not only does it not add anything of value to the story, it makes our main character even more secure than she already is, and it's unbearable. It was already unbearable, but it's even more unbearable in this book, and I absolutely detested it. The other thing about Kat is that she's very vulgar, and I just didn't like some of the stuff that she said. It just took it too far, in my opinion. And I think the reason why she did that again was to sound edgy, and it just did not work. Did not work. Gross. I don't like it. Why do it? Just gross. One of the big reveals of this book is that Jack, whatever his name is not dead. Now, Jack dies in the first book. We don't actually see a body in defense, but I mean, like, literally boulders of rock like fall on top of him, and it's like very clearly said that he's dead. He comes back in this book, and you know, he saves Violet at one point, and you know, I think that's to sow, you know, the idea that maybe he's good and maybe he's reformed. But then we actually realise that no, he's very bad, and he's actually Venin as well, because he has red-rimmed eyes, and that's a very key symptom or key indicator that somebody is Venin or turning into a Venin. And Jack is just, he's just so one-dimensional. We don't know anything about Jack. We don't know anything about his family. We don't know why he is the way he is. I think it would be really compelling to get insight into Jack and to why he is such a twat, because we don't know. So I can't buy into this guy's motivations. The only motivation that we get is that it was because he is the way he is because Ten chose Violet. But the point is that Jack was like this before she ever got bonded to Ten. He was like this on the first day on the parapet when he tried to knock her off. It's just really dumb, and it just doesn't make sense. For any villain, I want to know like why they are the way they are, like what made them the way they are, and we just have no insight into that currently, which just seems like a really missed opportunity in my opinion. All right, we're going to take a little break. I'll be back in a second. All right, I'm back. We're 40 minutes into this video and I'm not even halfway through the book, so I might have to do 2 separate videos. We'll see. I want to do at least part 1 and then I'll move on to part 2. All right, so let's go. One of the things in the first book that was really funny and like really dumb was how Violet would poison the people she was going to fight, and how nobody realised that she was doing this, like she was poisoning people. Like, it's beyond me that nobody caught on to this apart from Xaden. She keeps doing it in this book, and I still don't understand how no one's caught up to it. Like, how have none of her friends realised this? How have none of the other cadets like realise this. It's just so dumb. The romance scenes in this book are also just really cringe. I think that's, you know, to be expected now with Rebecca Yaros. I'm not going to read the scenes out because I think I might vomit, but it's just really gross. Like, they're just really gross. I think, again, she was trying to be graphic to come across as like edgy, but it's just really cringe and it just sounds really stupid, and it's like nobody talks like this. So I don't understand, like, why do this? Why do this? All right, let's move on. I'm going to skip ahead a bit because if I went through every single thing, I'm just going to like have a 5-hour video. All right, one thing I've noticed that Yaros does is she introduces every single character. Not every single character has to have a name. Not every single character has to have characteristics. If they are there just to serve a plot point, you don't need to give us like tons of detail about that character, because otherwise we have hundreds of names that we think we have to know, when in actual fact we maybe need to know 10% of those names. Now, like, one really good example of this is Mason. Mason is a character that we meet at some point at the beginning of the book, and then he gets referenced a few times in between, and then the key point in which he gets referenced is when he gets killed. He gets murdered. It's just like, why do you have to tell us every single thing? Like, again, like, leave us to our imagination. Like, you've told us this is a high stakes world, when in actual fact it's not, because none of the key people actually die or get hurt or like gravely injured. But yeah, all the side characters, you know, you give us these little spiels about who they are, where they're from, and all of this stuff. But ultimately it doesn't matter because we know they're going to die. We know the insignificant ones are going to die. So like, what is the literal point? It's just, it goes into this broader like issue again that I have with this author, which is that she doesn't focus on the things that matter, and yet she like really focuses on the things that nobody cares about or nobody should care about. I just don't get it. I think if she cut out a lot of that deadweight, a lot of those deadweight characters, the book would probably shrink by about 100 pages, like, no joke. And I think that's an issue. That's a really big issue, and I think a publisher needs to do better. Going back to Jack Barlow, I forgot, you know, the resurrection trope. I hate it. I hate the resurrection trope. I really do not like it, because I think it undermines a lot of the like story points, and I just think it's a really bad technique for an author to use to create drama. With Jack Barlow coming back though, what I thought was really weird was how no other writer brought it up. Nobody else, not even her friends, brought up like, how did this guy come back to life? Nobody questions it. And again, like, you're supposed to be like training these people to think, right? And yet not one of them thinks about why this is not a good thing. Not one person questions, how did this guy come back to life? Like, nobody questions it at any point. Like, it's just so odd. All right, we're gonna keep scrolling. All right. One thing I semi-liked about this book was the kind of topic or conversation around propaganda, and how propaganda is a weapon in itself, and a very effective weapon. Now, if you look at like what happened in Nazi Germany, propaganda was probably one of the biggest weapons that the Nazis used to create their narrative against the Jews and other marginalized groups. And I find that topic in itself, like propaganda, like super interesting. And I just think it could have been explored a lot more. Like, this is the thing about this author is that she'll very rarely find something that is mildly interesting, but then she won't dig deep enough into it. And so it's very surface level, and it's just there as like a statement, but she doesn't go deeper than just a one-line sentence. And that really annoys me, because it means that you haven't really thought about what you're doing. It means that you haven't really mapped out what you're doing. And that's just unforgivable, in my opinion. Like, I think if you're a writer, and she's written like a ton of books now, like, you should be at least somewhat cognizant of all the different threads you have and how those things map out. And yet propaganda is never mentioned again in this entire book. It's an 800-page book. It's just like really silly. Like, I just find it really frustrating. Going back to Violet, our favourite main character, one of the constant things that comes up in this book is how she doesn't want to involve her friends in some of the stuff that she's working on, because she doesn't want to put them in danger, because they are like not super trained in using their like mind barriers and all of that. At one point where she, you know, she's distancing herself from them, and you know, she doesn't want them to get involved because she doesn't want them to get hurt, but then she tells them, right? And I think you know, I'd probably do the same. I'd tell my closest friends what's happening in my life so they can help me and vice versa. There's one bit where she tells Rhiannon, who is her best friend, and she says, Rhiannon says, like, I want to help you, and like, I'm so sorry you went through this alone. And this is what our main character says. Her reaction to my outright deception couldn't be more different from how I'd torn Xaden to shreds. That's just because you're a selfish twat, Violet. And all you care about is yourself. You don't think about anyone beyond yourself. Whereas your dear friend, Rhiannon, she's not like that. What I actually didn't realise until after I finished the book and I watched like a few videos of people talking about this book is that Rhiannon is mixed race and that Xaden is brown. Like he's got like rich skin. And I just did not know that, because if you look at all of the character art, he's white. God, guys, you need to sort out your internalized racism, seriously. It's like Rhysand as well. Like Rhysand from Akatai is described as having like tanned olive skin. And, you know, I have olive skin. So why is none of the character art look like Rhysand with my skin tone? Like, I just don't get it. Just don't get it. All right. One thing, I keep saying one thing, like I said, very disordered. One other thing that I really hated about this book was the constant references to the gods of this world. Now, there's the goddess of war. There's Malik. He's like the god of hell or something. I don't know. I think he's like the devil. But like we don't get any explanation of these gods. Like we don't get any explanation as to like how religion plays a role in this world. And so, like, are these people religious? Do they go to church? Do they have the equivalent of church or like a holy place of worship? Like I just don't get it. There's this one bit where, although like the first half of the book, there's constant references to Dun. They say holy Dun. And she is the goddess of war. But yet we don't get told that she's the goddess of war until much later on in the book. And I actually tagged it because I was like, oh, finally, we actually know what she is the goddess of now. Again, it goes back to what I said about the writing and about not having much intention. And it's just like a hat-dash group of things happening without any real thought or planning. It's just beyond me how a book like this can get published in 2023. One of my tweets about this book when I was reading it was how, why is it when characters who are trying to be portrayed as edgy all wear black? And we get multiple references to characters wearing the colour black, all black, in this book, whether it's Xaden or Violet's mother, Violet herself. And it's like, really, these are people in their 20s. Are we really trying to be like edgy? Like 1990s edgy wearing all black? Like, I just don't get it. I just really don't get it. I actually write, one of my notes is, why is there an obsession with the colour black? It's just really odd. One part of this book that I think if it had been executed well, I would have really liked, was when Violet and the gang basically go into the library to get this book. Now, the reason why they need to get this book is because it will tell them how to improve the wards, or like how to put wards into Xaden's town that he rules or whatever. Because it doesn't have wards. Like, that's the biggest problem with where Brennan and the gang are, is that it doesn't have any wards, so they're not protected. So the Venom can go there and, you know, they'll be able to kill everybody. Whereas the Venom can't go into Basgiath because the wards are up, right? So it's really important that they have wards. This is a really big focus of the book, is that Violet has to understand how to get the wards up. And yet, one of the first scenes where they go to find that book from one of the original founders of like Navarre or Basgiath or whatever, she goes into the library with her gang. They have this like amazing plan, obviously. And one of the things that just doesn't make sense is they have to go into like the cellar, and to get from the start of the library to the cellar, it takes about like 30-40 minutes. And bear in mind, that's not including to get back. And yet they only have, like, the timing doesn't add up. They only have like 10 minutes in the room to find the book. And then if they want to make it back on time, they only have like another 30 minutes to get back on time. But they spend so much time in the room that it doesn't make sense that they are able to make it back in time, which obviously they do because they're the main characters and they're perfect and they get everything right and nothing goes wrong. But they literally make it back just on time, but the timing doesn't actually add up if you read the timing in that scene. And it's just really silly. Like, it's just really silly. Like, it would have been good if somebody had got trapped in the library, because it would have shown there are actually stakes, but obviously there are no stakes for our main characters. One of the many things that Yaros is really terrible about is her foreshadowing is so obvious. You know, she really hones in on something that will foreshadow something later on in the series, to the point where it just makes it so predictable. For me, that was the Brennan piece that she was so fixated on in the first book. And in this one, there is this constant reference to the fact that no rider has ever been named king. Now, obviously that is going to happen. It's either going to be Xaden or it's going to be Eric. And I have a feeling it's going to be Eric, just because his father is actually king. The thing about Eric as well is he would be a reluctant king, because he doesn't want to be king. He doesn't like the concept of royalty. Like, he just wants to be a rider. But I think with the right person at his side, whether it's Violet or maybe even Kat, he'll be king at some point. That's one theory I have. All the other theory is that Xaden somehow becomes king and Violet is his queen or whatever. She focuses on these things so much and makes it so obvious that it's obviously going to come back in the next book or later books, because she just cannot do subtlety at all. At all. Now, when they were going through, sorry, I'm flipping back and forth, going back to what I was talking about earlier, when they go to the library to steal the book. Now, the book belongs to the king, so that's Eric's dad. And when they go into the section where the book is, what I don't understand is how the king, or like somebody else in the university or whatever you want to call it, college, doesn't get notified by the fact that a foreign person, i.e. a person who hasn't been approved to be in that section, is in that section. Like, it makes no sense. Like, this is a limited edition rare book written by like the founders of Navarre, and yet anyone can just waltz in there, apparently. I mean, there's security guards and stuff, and they knock them out. There's only 2, which doesn't seem like a lot. That aside, like, you would expect they would have safeguards within safeguards in the vault, so that it would recognise when, like, anybody but the king has entered. And yet that just doesn't happen. Like, if I had something that was, like, priceless, like a priceless artifact, I would make sure that I would have, like, security within security within security, to make sure no one can get in. And if somebody did get in, I'd be able to identify that person. And yet that doesn't exist. It's just really badly written. Like, really badly written. It's a bunch of half-assed ideas that just don't make sense. And this is just one example of one of them. All right, let's keep going forward, because, yeah, otherwise I'm just going to go on forever. One of the big aspects of this book is Dane's redemption arc. Now, we get a lot of focus on Dane at the start of the book about how Violet thinks Dane is going to kill her because of what happened in the previous events. Now, if you actually look at one of my comments, I actually wrote, his redemption arc will begin and he will kill Varish. What happens 200, 300 pages later? Dane's redemption arc begins because he kills Varish. Lack of subtlety, folks. Lack of subtlety. 10. 10 is I was disappointed in 10 in this book. He constantly references in this book how the only reason why he bonded with Violet is because she's intelligent. And yet, this person makes mistake after mistake after mistake. And she's just fucking dumb. She's just dumb. Like, she's objectively dumb. Just everything from how she handles her personal relationships to not being able to identify that Andana was the key to getting the wards up. So there's this puzzle that they have to solve, which is that 6 + 1 is the answer to getting the wards up. And 6 is the 6 main dragons from the main dragon families. +1 is Andana, because Andana she's not a typical dragon, obviously. She can camouflage and she changes colour every week, whatever, right? The point is that as soon as we got the 6 + 1, my first reaction was, it's got to be Andana. Like, it's got to be Andana. Like, she's the odd one out of all the dragons. And, like, she's the key, because she's been alluded to as being the key throughout this entire book. And yet, it takes our main character hundreds of pages to realise that. Like, literal hundreds of pages to realise that. I mentioned earlier that the wards are like the big focal point of this book. It's like one of the most important things that this group of people need to achieve. And yet, the amount of times that our main character forgets this, like, she just forgets it. She doesn't think about it. And I'm like, surely your #1 priority should be at all costs trying to get the wards up, right? Because once you get the wards up, you can defend yourself. and your people will be protected. And yet that just does not happen. There are literally like chapters among chapters among chapters where there is no mention of the wards, and yet that is the number one most important thing she can do. It's the one place where she can add value, and yet she just forgets it. Like, it's just bizarre. Like, it's just really, really bizarre. Going back to the really terrible foreshadowing that this author employs, there's one bit where they think they're going to get the wards up, where they think they have the answer. This is before they realise the 6+1 and Dana being the key to that. She constantly says how the wards are going to go up, and good thing we'll have the wards up soon and all of this. And obviously that means that the wards aren't going to work. And that's exactly what happens. The wards fail. They don't completely fail, as in the venom can get through and they will like get really injured, but they don't actually fully die. And so that means the wards have failed, right? Ultimately they failed because they haven't killed what needs to be killed. Again, it's just this constant lack of, you know, focusing on nuance, focusing on the details, and just like being really narrow-sighted with the way that she's executing the different plot points in this book. All right, we're just gonna keep going. There's so many comments that I'm missing, but just again, for the sake of time, we're gonna do this. Okay, so one other thing that I'm predicting is that Xaden is not an only child. We get told that Xaden's mother left him when he was a child. She's obviously going to come back later. I have a theory that she might also be somehow involved with the venom. Violet asks him, "You're his only child, right?" i.e. meaning his father. And he says, you know, he goes on this kind of sob story about his mother leaving them. And again, I don't trust this author at all. And I just know for a fact that his mother's going to come back later, and he's probably going to have a sibling. I have a feeling it might be his cousin. I've forgotten his name, because they're very similar and they look very, very alike. So I have a feeling they might actually be brothers, but that's my only kind of evidence to support that one. One constant reference that we get is the reference to Xaden's heart. We must get it at least 20 times in this book. Like, as an example, one time when she sees him after being apart from each other, she says that she finds his heartbeat very comforting. That's just one example. It's referenced multiple times throughout this book. And yet, at the end of this book, the big reveal or the big cliffhanger is that Xaden is venom. Now, I think when somebody turns into venom, like, I think they're technically considered dead, which he did die, because it literally says he dies and then he kind of comes back to life. But I don't think you're like human when you come back to life. Like, you're this, I don't know, other being. And this whole plot line of like him becoming venom is very akin to Vampire Academy. Now, I'm not saying this author plagiarized that series, but my gosh, are there so many parallels with this specific plot line, and probably other plot lines too. Because Dimitri, I think is his name, he becomes whatever he becomes, and then there's this whole storyline of him trying to become human again. I think it's the Stragoi or something. There's a whole storyline of him trying to get back to Rose, his love interest, and I just have a feeling this is exactly what's going to happen in this book. Also, like, there's a lot of references to Harry Potter, like Umbridge is definitely referenced in Varish. Like, he's very much like Umbridge. There was one scene in particular that very much reminded me of the scene when she forces him to write with the quill and it hurts his hand. There's also the like last stand at Basgiath College. It kind of reminded me of the last stand at Hogwarts. Again, I'm not saying she plagiarized and she copied ideas from other authors, but there's a lot of references to SJM books as well. It's pretty dodgy, guys. Pretty dodgy. Let's keep moving. All right. One theme that comes up quite a lot in this book is like family dynamics, especially between Brennan, Mira, Violet, and their mother. And in the first book, the mother is really portrayed as this really like horrible woman, and she is a horrible woman because she treats her children like shit. In this book, she dies. You know, she is one of the big kind of things that happens at the end of the book. She dies, and yet we can't feel any empathy or sympathy for the characters because she's a horrible person and she deserves to die. Like, she basically sacrifices herself so that Violet can live, and it just doesn't feel honest to her character because she's done some really horrible things and she's just a really horrible person. I feel like a lot of people on like Twitter and stuff were saying how that was like a gut punch, but it's like, how? Like, we're literally made to hate this character. Like, how is it a gut punch? Like, I have no sympathy towards this character. Like, I'm glad she's dead. Horrible, horrible person. All right, let's I'm gonna just like power through now. Going back to Andana being the 7th dragon, the key to getting the wards up, I actually wrote this when it says there are only 6 dragons: black, blue, green, orange, brown and red. And then I wrote Andana is the 7th, question mark, obviously. Yeah, there's another bit where when the big battle begins towards the end of the book, Xaden says this to Violet: I love you. Oh gods, no, I refuse to accept the goodbye in his tone. So that's definitely reason enough to believe that Xaden will not be on the same place as Violet in the next book. I have a feeling in the next book we will actually have 2 POVs. One will be Xaden and one will be Violet, but they will be in very different parts of the world. The reveal of the 7th breed, my reaction to this was, called it. Of course Violet has a unique new breed who also happen to be needed for the ward stone. Those are what are needed to power the wards. Yeah, it's just really crazy. It's just really, really crazy, honestly. Yeah, last thing I'll kind of mention is the fact that in the last chapter, Xaden's chapter, it talks about how he doesn't bother reaching for Sagail because she's been eerily silent since the battle ended. I think this feeds back into him being a Venin and about how like Venins can't be bonded to dragons or something. So that's going to be telling for the next book. That also means that if his connection with his dragon has been torn, then Sagail is like, he can die now, and Violet can't die at the same time, because if he's torn from Sagail, or their like bond is torn, then he can die and it won't affect anyone, right? So I don't know, maybe she's setting up like a big character death, I don't know. One other thing that I found really funny in the last chapter, the Xaden chapter, is how he says this: what is it about me that fails the females in my life? I cringe whenever I hear a guy say females. Just say women, or I don't know, reference them in another way. But like, to say females is such a Sarah J Maas thing to do. It's so gross. I don't know why. I just find it so gross. Like, it's just not nice. Xaden and Jack are gonna have to like band together a bit because they're both Venin now. And yeah, I think their ending was weird because there's a big gap between Violet's last chapter and there's the beginning of Xaden's chapter, which is that they're in bed together, and we don't know what's happened in between. I don't think most people can tell if someone is Venin. I think only if you really look at the eyes can you tell, but nobody was able to tell, and Violet is still sleeping with him in his bed, knowing that he's Venin, which I think is really creepy. Like, would you sleep with a Venin knowing that you're... I mean, yeah, you might love them, but like, still, would you sleep with someone that you know is like, was like turning into an evil being? It's just like really weird. So yeah, so those are all my notes from my iPad. I'm actually going to get my notes app up now because I made a few other notes. I just think overall this book is just really bad. So yeah, I'm going to just talk about a few things. Formatting of the ebook was really bad, by the way, and there was a lot of bad punctuation and a lot of spelling mistakes, which I think is unforgivable. And I think if a publishing house does that, I think people should be entitled to somewhat of a refund. Like, it's so amateur hour. All right, some theories that I've got that I may have already mentioned. So Arik will be king. Xaden is Anakin Skywalker turning to the dark side to save Padme, which in this case is obviously Violet. Venin feels like the Stragoi from Vampire Academy, or the ones from the Throne of Glass. I forgot what they're called in Throne of Glass. Both Violet and Xaden were giving power at the same time. They thought they were both dying. That's also feeds into her being part Venin as well. Violet's second signet theory is that it has something to do with the dead, which is why she could see Liam. I don't think it was a hallucination, and it will help Xaden defeat the Venin. Or it could also be that she could see into the future. See quote where it says she saw the war months before the battle and it was just like the dream. Or she could also be a power amplifier, which is how she will end up saving Xaden, because it talks about how like other characters in the book like feel their power strengthened when they're around her. It's also a possibility. My Violet's dad theory, I think Violet's dad was Venin and her mother was trying to find a cure with Neolon, whatever his name is, which is referenced in one of the missives. References to Heartbeat so many times made me think he'd become a version of himself that didn't have that, which is exactly what happens. Yeah, Nowlin is a Venin, and Dana is a chameleon, the 7th dragon. And then one thing that came up that I didn't actually mention was the Venin are targeting the riders with the nightmares. So all the ones that were at the place where Liam died at the end of book 1 all get nightmares. And so it's not just Violet and Xaden having them. it reminds me of actually how, I've forgotten his name, but the main villain in the most recent Stranger Things season targets certain people. And it kind of reminded me of that, actually, about how the Venom are targeting the riders who are having nightmares. Dorian from Throne of Glass reference, interesting. Yeah, I do think Xaden is like Dorian from Throne of Glass, where like Dorian actually becomes evil in one or two of the books, and then he kind of gets back to normal because like Kale saves him, I think it is. So I think that could definitely be a potential arc for Xaden. Yeah, Xaden is tethered from Segale and can survive now if she dies. Violet's dad is Venom, she's half Venom, hence the silver thread in her hair. Yeah, so a lot of the same thing. So I think overall, look, I'm going to summarise this all up now. Bad writing, bad character development, bad world building, bad politics. Like, she even ruined the dragons. Like, the one thing that like gave me some hope in the first book was the dragons. Like, I really like Ten and I like Segale. Like, I like being in their heads. But like, just ruined them as well because they were contradicting themselves. And I thought dragons were meant to be like really smart, right? I think the author, if you put aside her like political beliefs, she's just very bad at what she does. Like, objectively very bad at what she does. Now, if you like reading it, that's fair enough. I didn't actually give my disclaimer. But if you do like reading it, that's fair enough. Like, if you enjoy it, fair play to you. If this is what's going to get you back into reading, I think that's great. But I think if you call this good fantasy or like well-written fantasy, you are delusional. Because these types of books actually give fantasy a really bad name. There is so much incredible fantasy fiction out there that is just like, it's just night and day. It's just so much better than this shit that is being pushed up our faces every single day. And it makes me really sad that there are so many talented authors out there that aren't even going to get a fraction of what this author is getting attention-wise. I just found out this morning that she is now a #1 bestseller, which is just, it's just, I'm insulted. I'm insulted on behalf of all the incredible authors out there. The fact that this author wrote 2 books in the space of like a year is incredibly concerning. The only author that can probably do that is KJ Parker, because he did that with his most recent trilogy, and that's because he's an incredibly talented writer. And yet you have this person who, again, politics aside, I mean, the politics is just the cherry on top. Politics aside, is just not good at her craft. It's embarrassing. It's honestly embarrassing. This type of literature is being pushed down our throats because it feeds a narrative. The thematic work was just so lackluster. You know, this is a woman who comes from a military family. I believe her husband is or was in the military. She's a military wife. And yet, again, politics aside, she does such a poor job of exploring the military as a concept and the impact of war on the average person. Like, it's just shockingly bad. Now, let's bring in her politics. It kind of makes sense, right? It kind of makes sense why she does it so badly. It's because she's very clearly pro American military, which, again, I'm not going to get into a political debate about that right now. But my point is that if you're on the fence about reading this series, don't. Seriously, don't. Like, message me and tell me the things you like and I will give you a recommendation, like a personalised recommendation. But this is bad, and it's actually hurting the publishing industry, in my opinion, because when people think this type of stuff is okay, this type of writing is okay, they then promote it, and then other people think it's okay. And it's not. Like, I'm trying not to be a gatekeeper here, because nobody has the right to be a gatekeeper and gatekeep certain types of literature, but it's bad. Like, it's really bad, and I'm just really worried that this is what a lot of fantasy is going to look like in the next couple of decades, and that's really sad. It's just really, really sad. I'm going to do a video about this, about like the quality of books, and specifically book talk books, like things that get promoted on there heavily soon, so watch this space. But if you're endorsing this book, again, take away the author's politics away from it for a second, though I don't think we can necessarily separate the art from the artist given the themes that she's covering in this book. But just for argument's sake, it's just bad, guys. Like, it's just bad. Like I said, if you want a rec, let me know. I'll give you a tailored rec, but it's bad. It's like scary bad, honestly. And I don't have much hope with the publishing industry currently. So yeah, that's my review. Like I said, if you like it, good for you. If I hear any disrespectful, read any disrespectful comments down below, specifically about the Israel-Palestine situation and the author's political views, I will just block you straight up. If you're rude about it, if you want to have a genuine discussion about it, I've always said this, I'm open ears for that sort of stuff. But if you're rude and you're, you know, belittling people and all of that stuff, then it's just going to be a straight up block. So there we have it. Oh man, this was a long video. I think it's over an hour long and I'm tired. And yeah, I really don't want to do a rant review for a while. But it was just bad, guys. It was just bad. And I know this one was a lot more disordered than my first one, but naturally it's going to be just because there's things I'm referencing from both books. But I think I got the main points across. Let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know if you read it and your thoughts on this book. And any theories as well. But I think all my theories are going to come true, like genuinely. So yeah, please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. It really does help. And if you're new to my channel, please give us a subscribe and I'll see you in my next one. Thanks for watching, everybody. Stay safe, take care, and I will see you soon. Bye.